Films can do many, many things, and sometimes they can just leave you broken. So, it's October, we got Halloween coming up. I figured this is the best time to pull the trigger on something I've been thinking about for a little while, which is a list of 10 movies and or movie moments that freak me out, or at least did at some point in the past. This is kind of an odd mix. So like, say for instance, when I did my movie scenes that made me cry, that was a list, dominated by things that make me cry every time. Some of the things that we're going to talk about were things that freaked me out as a kid, and I more or less got over, but like even watching them now still like reminds me that they used to freak me out. Some of these are individual scenes, some of these are whole movies. This kind of runs the gamut. But here we go with 10 movies or movie moments that just kind of, yeah. Oh, and one other thing before I get started, none of these are jump scares. These are all moments that actually stick with me past the moment of temporary, so keep that in mind. So, starting with number 10, and we'll start with one that is, admittedly, is kind of silly, but it really did unsettle me. That's Pizza the Hutt. Yeah, from Spaceballs. And yes, this was the same movie that had basically the identical scene from the alien birth scene from Alien, just without blood. And that disturbed me way less than this creature. I don't know what it is. I think it's something about the way he pulsates, and the guy who's with him starts picking bits off of him and eating them. It's just gross. And I mean, that's what it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be gross. But in this particular case, it was gross in a way that really kind of left me like, as a kid. And when I would rewatch this film when I was younger, I would tend to skip over the Pizza the Hutt scene because, yeah, kind of freaked me out. It doesn't really anymore, but I watch it now and I do get like, sort of in my gut, a little, Okay, moving on from that. Number 9. The Descent. Now, The Descent is one of my favorite horror movies, and it is worth pointing out that I am not claustrophobic. However, watching this movie, I kind of regretted seeing it in the theater, more specifically seeing it in a theater with slightly cramped seats where I couldn't stretch out my legs as far as I would like, because I found myself, as this movie went on, really wishing that I could just confirm that I'm not confined, because this movie is shot and constructed so masterfully to make you feel enclosed and make you empathize with the characters and the fact that they are trapped. And I don't want to spoil stuff that goes on later in the movie in case anyone hasn't seen it. But if you are claustrophobic, I would actually say don't watch it at all. And even if you aren't, I would be shocked if it doesn't at least get you to understand why people get that way. Yeah, I tell you, there was no better feeling at the end of this movie than being able to walk outside and be in the open air. I really needed it after this one. So let's move along. Number 8, The Ring. Basically the whole movie. I do okay with it now, but first time I watched it, it made me really tense. Like in a way that wasn't especially fun at the time. I think it's just the way the film builds and the sense of dread in the atmosphere, and the little things that are off, like the fly in the video. She pauses it and plucks a fly out of the screen, and the way the horses react, and then ultimately seeing her crawl out of the TV screen at the end. I'm not going to spoil it. I feel like everybody knows what goes on in The Ring at this point. It's been parodied so much. It's one of those things that everybody just knows. But oh man, that movie made me there are not many movies that made me as tense watching them as this one did. Because generally movies, if they rack up tension for me, it's for a scene. it generally doesn't keep building scene over scene over scene over scene, and it really did with me for this one. That was definitely rough, especially the first time. Number 7, Requiem for a Dream. Now this one is one that kind of freaked me out in a different way from a lot of the others, because this one is just, it is sadness that feels oppressive. And the way that a good horror movie or scary movie can have an atmosphere that feels oppressive, a sense of dread that feels oppressive, an ever-present threat that feels oppressive, this is just sadness to the point of oppression. And yeah, if you haven't seen this movie, like if it wasn't as steeped in adult content as it is, I would say just forget about anti-drug, education in schools. Just show kids this at about 5th grade. They won't want to touch anything for a while. And I mean, a big part of why it works is that it's not reefer madness. It rings true. It makes sense. And the reason what makes it so depressing is that it starts at the beginning with drug addictions. It starts when things are good. It starts when, these people are taking these things, for their various reasons that they do, and it's working for them. It's giving them what they want, but then over time, it doesn't anymore. And watching it spiral over time, but also understanding how we got here, because you saw in the beginning it worked for them. It gave them that sense of fulfillment that life wasn't giving them. And then to just watch it escalate and fall apart around these characters over the course of the film it's crushing is what it is. And there's no one specific scene, but it is just so oppressively depressing that it left me shaken. Like in a way that I would compare to something like sometimes Black Mirror is able to do. It just, like I needed to go outside, like breathe the fresh air and, see some birds or something after I saw this movie. Number 6, dipping back again into childhood, The Dark Crystal. And this one is, like with Pizza the Hutt, it is a specific scene, and it is the death of the Skeksis Emperor at the beginning of the movie. And so he's in this bed, and he is this emaciated, gasping, and he's got like this to his breathing, and he just looks so sick. He just looks like absolute death. And, this sort of desperate last sort of he has before he dies, and then crumbles and literally falls apart. That really, like watching it still, I'm like, yeah, that's hard. That's a tough thing for me to see even now, but especially as a kid, like that was like the predominant image that stuck in my head of the Dark Crystal for a while, because that just emaciated, sickly thing just falling to pieces. Ugh. Gah. Next up, number 5, from Annihilation. And this I would consider to be a bit of a spoiler for this movie, but yeah, I need to talk about this thing. It's not like ending spoiler, but the moment, if you didn't already know about it, yeah, I'm gonna dig into it now. And that's the bear scene. Now, there's actually a lot about this movie that really left me kind of going, whoa. But the thing was, most of it, like, intrigued me. Like, I was a little unsettled, but I was also sort of drawn in. The bear scene just left me in a state of horror. So, in case you haven't seen the movie, oh boy, it's hard to explain what goes on in here. In this area, basically living things are melding together in bizarre ways, and it is resulting in animal or plant just things like abominations, for lack of a better term, that are just there, but very much behaving as if they've always been there, but are very clearly new and very, very, very wrong. And what goes on with the bear is there was earlier in the film, it was one of the group got killed, and then one of them starts to crack under the pressure, and she hears the dead companion outside this house that they've taken shelter in, screaming, going, "Help!" And not just saying it, like screaming, "Oh God, help!" And she runs out to try and, save it. And what it ends up being is it is this bear with almost no flesh on its skull. And when it opens its mouth, it doesn't roar. It screams in this woman's voice, "Help me." And something about the desperation and the sincerity of the terror in the voice of this dead woman, and the fact that this bear isn't necessarily even doing it trying to lure anything out. It's just when it opens its mouth, that's the sound that comes out of it. It's so wrong. It is so wrong on so many levels, and it just that scene just lingers, and it is, it's a tense scene. Even if that had not been a messed up bear and it just been a bear, that's still a really tense scene. But the fact that it goes down the way that does, it's, oh man, like that's the stuff of nightmares. Number 4, Blade Runner, the original. Again, this one counts as a bit of a spoiler because it's a late scene in the film, but it's kind of an iconic film. If you're gonna watch it, you probably would have by now. So, the death of Eldon Tyrell at the hands of Roy Batty. What it is a head crush with the thumbs and the eyes. And you're probably thinking, like in Game of Thrones, from that fight between the Mountain and Oberyn Martell. And sort of, and while the Game of Thrones take on that kind of death was more brutal and was certainly more graphic, there's something about how long it takes, or at least how long it feels like it takes in Blade Runner, because you hear, initially you just hear these breaths sort of Tyrell breathing as he kind of starts to feel the pressure of Roy crushing, and you slowly see him struggling and Roy's hands shaking, and then you hear the crack. And that crack, and it's this muted crack because it's his skull cracking, but it's happening, under his skin. So it's this muffled, drawn out crack. And Tyrell starts to scream, and it's really, really rough. I love that movie. That's one of my favorite movies, but that, I tend to get up and, use the bathroom, get a drink of water. I find a reason to not be in the room when that scene happens. It's, ugh, God. Okay, so next up, number 3. This one is going to include spoilers, and there's really no way around that because it's a movie that I don't think a lot of people saw, and I think even fewer people remember. But I'm going to talk about it anyway. It's a movie called Four Lions. This was a movie, it came out, I forget what year it came out. Might have been around 2010 or so. And it was sort of, it caused a mild controversy at the time because it was a comedy about terrorists. It was a comedy about would-be suicide bombers. And that's what it is. It's a British comedy, and it's about this group of young men who want to be suicide bombers. They believe in the cause, and they want to die for that purpose. But they're also really bad at it. And so there's a lot of, sort of dark British humor about the fact that these guys aren't very good. But at the same time, it's not like it makes fun of terrorism as a thing. It just makes fun of these specific guys who are just really bad at it. But the main character in it, I think he's called Omar. But in any case, what left me deeply disturbed about this movie, and I don't consider this a failing, even though it's a comedy. I think it's my belief that it was intended to be disturbing on this level. He has a wife and a daughter. I'm sorry, not a daughter, a son. He has a wife and a child, and he loves them, and they love him. And they know what he's going to do. And they're supportive. And that is incredibly unsettling. That someone with all this to live for, and he's got a decent house, he's got a decent home life, he's got all these things. The reasons that so many people hang on and push through so much crap in their lives. And he still wants to do this. And in the end of the movie, he does. He does blow himself up. And the scenes of him interacting with his son, and telling him bedtime stories, and having this wonderful relationship with his wife, they disturbed me far more than the actual bombings did or ever could. It just shook me at a fundamental level. And I don't know how many other people had that experience watching this movie. I don't even know how many other people have seen this movie. But that, I think at the time I saw it, I don't think my daughter was born yet. But I do think that her mother was pregnant with her, and we knew that. So I knew that was going to be in my future, and I was starting to get into that parental headspace. So I haven't rewatched this movie since I saw it for the first time. I'm not sure I have it in me to ever do it. Number 2, Under the Skin. Now, this movie as a whole is pretty unsettling. But it is one specific scene that I'm going to focus on, because as much, actually quite a bit like Annihilation, much of the other scenes were unsettling in a way that was intriguing. But there is one scene that, oh my God. Okay, I'm just going to have to describe this scene. And again, this might be considered a spoiler. It's about halfway in. Or maybe not even that far, so, take what you will from it. So, first I need to kind of try to explain this movie, which is its own weird thing. So, Scarlett Johansson is playing what appears to be an attractive young woman, and she goes about an area talking men who don't know her into coming back to her place where this happens. Like it's really abstract and it's really bizarre, and it's supposed to be, but it's also has between the vibe and the way it's shot and the music, there's a very sinister vibe to it. That whatever is going on is not good. So, but there's a scene on a beach, and she's chatting up this guy, near the beach, which is something we've seen her do. We've seen her go through this cycle before, so we know what she's up to. And the guy sort of stops talking to her and goes, because there is this family, a father, a mother, and a baby, on the beach, and the mother, who was swimming, is getting pulled out by the tide. And the father has gone in to the water to try and save her. And he's not having much better luck. And this guy that Scarlett Johansson was trying to chat up, he dives into the water, and he drags the husband back to land. But the husband doesn't stay. He goes back out to try and get his wife. And the swimmer, the guy who tried to rescue him, he's laying panting, exhausted on the beach, and Scarlett Johansson walks up to him and picks up a rock and bashes his head in. And I'm trying to remember exactly how part of this plays out, because I have not rewatched this, but she takes his body, and this is all happening afternoon-ish, and she leaves. But then she goes back for his stuff that's still on the beach. And what left me this scene already was pretty unsettling and pretty disturbing, but what left me deeply, deeply shaken was she goes back to the beach at night. It's dark, and the baby's still there. It's sitting where it was left. It looks confused. It just needs help from somebody, from anybody, and she doesn't even notice it. Walks past it, picks up the stuff, and walks and leaves. Like, I honestly think it would have been less disturbing if she had stopped and killed the baby. I would have found that less disturbing than this complete failure to acknowledge this helpless child. That scene and the way it escalated as a whole it's honestly probably the single most disturbing portion of film that I have ever seen. The only reason I didn't turn the movie off was because I didn't have the strength to push buttons on the remote. Now, that might seem like, well, this should be at number one. And it's not necessarily that my number one is more disturbing on the whole than that one scene is. But the reason my number one is at number one is that Under the Skin, as unsettling and effective as it is, it kind of, the spell kind of broke for me in the tail end. Long story short, I basically wrapped my head around what was going on a little too well. Like, once I actually felt like I understood properly what was happening, and kind of had a sense of where it was going to go in its last stretch, and like for even a moment felt like I understood Scarlett Johansson's character, the spell was kind of broken. So it didn't quite stick the landing. It didn't totally fall apart, but it had been so unsettling up to that point. And then I kind of coasted through the last, 20 minutes or so. So the reason that my number one is because it is such the complete package of utterly unsettling, disturbing, speaks to, certainly to me, my core fears. And that is Invasion of the Body Snatchers, 1978 version. So this is the second film version of this particular story. And first of all, it's got a phenomenal cast. It's got Donald Sutherland in it. It's got a young Jeff Goldblum. It's got Leonard Nimoy. It's got Veronica Cartwright. It's it's really a terrific cast. And if you've never seen any version of this story, it is exactly what it sounds like. There are aliens who come down and they replace people with a looks exactly like them and has all their knowledge duplicate. But things are just a little off. And this movie has so perfectly encapsulates that creeping sense of dread that there's something wrong with the world that not only can you not put your finger on, but nobody else sees. It speaks to so many fears. It speaks to fears of isolation. It speaks to fears of self-doubt, of wondering if you are crazy. It speaks to the fear of never being able to trust anyone. It speaks to so much. And the worst part of it is they get you while you sleep. While you're sleeping, that's when you get replaced. And this movie, I don't know how old I was when I first saw it. Maybe 13, 14? And I've been watching this movie for over 20 years. And still, to this day, whenever I watch this movie, I have a bad night's sleep and I have screwed up dreams. Every single time, without fail. And I don't want to go into any more specific detail about this movie, because if you have not seen it, I highly recommend it. Like some of the movies that I've talked about here, even if you like kind of being unsettled and freaked out a bit, I wouldn't necessarily recommend, at least as a blanket statement, a lot of them. Like Under the Skin, I wouldn't, like, even Annihilation, which is a movie I love, that's a hard movie for me to recommend. I kind of need to know the specific person and know what they like to be able to recommend, those kinds of movies. I just recommend this one. It is a good movie. It is a really good movie. It is a really unsettling movie, and it is the escalation of how bad things get and the sense that this cannot possibly go well. And I don't want to talk about it any more than that, because I think if you haven't seen it, you should just go ahead and watch it. But yeah, the idea that you can't trust the people around you, you can't sleep, you can't trust your own instinct about who your friends are, all of that just creeps in and builds steadily throughout the movie. Because things are off ever so slightly, basically since frame one of this movie. And it's like this infection of wrongness just spreads. Oh man, that's an effective film. And still to this day, I cannot watch it without having a bad night's sleep and screwed up dreams. And that is why I have to give it my number one spot when I talk about movies or movie scenes that just freak me out. So that's my list, folks. What are some movies or movie moments or scenes or what have you that really pushed you to your limits? Or maybe you even had to turn off a movie. Whatever it is, think about it and drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. There's also a whole bunch of stuff you could do, because there's buttons and there's links, including one to my Patreon if you feel like supporting me that way. If you don't worry about it, because just remember, folks, you're the council. I just run the meetings. And until next time, this council is adjourned.